Hello, students, and welcome to biology class. In our topic of our discussion, we shall be looking at the cell properties and function. Cell properties and function. The cell have different functions it plays in our body system. We shall be looking at each functions one after the other. Before we delve into the topic, let's look at the learning objectives. At the end of the lesson, you should be able to 1. Define cellular respiration. 2. Describe aerobic and anaerobic respiration. 3. Give differences between aerobic and anaerobic respiration. Let's look at the meaning of cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is the process by which living cells break down food molecules like glucose to release energy and produces ATP, that is adenosine triphosphate, which is the cell's main energy currency. As you can see in the picture, is the human gas exchange. Now, in the lungs, with the left side of the image, when we breathe in oxygen from the air, goes into the lungs. This oxygen then moves from the lungs into our bloodstream. At the same time, carbon dioxide, which is a waste gas from our body, moves from our bloodstream into the lungs to be breathed out. In the body cell, which is the right side of the image, our blood carrying oxygen travels to all the cells in our body. Cells need oxygen to get energy from food. This process produces carbon dioxide as a waste. So, oxygen moves from the blood into the cell. Carbon dioxide, which is the waste gas, moves from the cell back into the blood to be carried to the lungs and exhaled. In a simple term, we breathe in oxygen for our cell and we breathe out the carbon dioxide our cell produces as a waste. Our blood acts like a delivery and pick up service between the lungs and the rest of the body. There are two types of respiration. They are the aerobic respiration and the anaerobic respiration. This is a picture illustrating aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration. Now, the image compared two ways cells make energy from glucose. The aerobic respiration, which is the left, it requires oxygen and it happens in the mitochondria, and also it breaks down glucose completely to carbon dioxide and water. In that process, it produces lots of ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, in the body cells, and it is used for sustained activities like the runner shown below. Like the runner shown in the picture, as you can see. In your right, you can see anaerobic respiration. And in anaerobic respiration, it does not require oxygen. And this happens in the cytoplasm. It breaks down glucose into lactic acid, produces little ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, and it used for short, intense activities like the sprinter shown in the picture as you can see. Let's look at aerobic respiration. Aerobic respiration is a type of respiration which requires oxygen to break down glucose into water, carbon dioxide, and energy. This type of respiration is commonly carried out by most living things. As you can see from the chemical equation, we have glucose, which is the starting point of respiration, which is being broken down by oxygen to produce carbon dioxide, water, and energy, which is also known as adenosine triphosphate. As I have said, when you look at the image or the picture before you, the image shows a chemical equation that represents cellular respiration. The reactant, the meaning of reactant means what goes in. The reactant is made up of glucose, or you call it sugar. And this is a simple sugar, a form of energy stored in food. And oxygen. This is the oxygen we breathe in. By the time we breathe in this oxygen, it will now break down this sugar. Now, let's go to the product. The product means what goes out, which is the carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is the waste product that we exhale. Now, look at water. Water is another byproduct of the reaction. Then, ATP, which is the usable energy. This is the most important product. ATP, which is the adenosine triphosphate, is the main energy currency of the cell, which powers almost all cellular processes in living organisms. In excess, cellular respiration is a process where living organisms like humans break down sugar from food in the presence of oxygen to release energy in the form of ATP, producing carbon dioxide and water as byproduct. This is how our body gets the energy they need to function. Now, the second part we shall be looking at is the anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic respiration is a type of respiration in which glucose is broken down inside the cell without oxygen to produce carbon dioxide and ethanol and 2 ATP. As you can see in the picture, is anaerobic respiration in animals and in yeast. Now, let's take it one after the other. In animals, glucose is being broken down to produce lactic acid plus energy. Now, in animals, which is lactic acid fermentation, when animal cells, like muscle cells, during intense exercise, don't get enough oxygen, they switch to this process. Glucose is completely broken down into lactic acid. This process releases a small amount of energy. The buildup of lactic acid is what causes muscle fatigue and soreness. Once oxygen becomes available, the lactic acid is usually converted back to pyruvate and enters aerobic respiration, or it's transported to the liver and converted to glucose. Now, in yeast fermentation, from the equation, you can see that glucose is converted to ethanol plus carbon dioxide plus energy. Now, Yeast and some bacteria use this type of anaerobic respiration. Glucose is broken down into ethanol, that is an alcohol, and carbon dioxide gas. This process releases slightly more energy than lactic acid fermentation. This is a process used in brewing, that is to produce alcohol, and baking, that is where carbon dioxide and bread rise. We have been able to discuss about the type of respiration, which is the aerobic and the anaerobic respiration. And anaerobic respiration, they are of two types, which are one, alcoholic fermentation, and two, lactic acid fermentation. We shall be taking them one after the other. Now, let's talk about the alcoholic fermentation. This type of respiration is when glucose is first converted to pyruvic acid. This type of respiration is common to some organisms that respire anaerobically, such as yeast, and some endoparasites, such as tapeworm, roundworm. The equation, as you can see, is for alcoholic fermentation, where glucose is being converted to ethanol plus energy. We shall be explaining this equation one after the other. As I have said, from the picture, the image displaying the chemical equation for the fermentation of glucose by yeast. Now, when we look at the reactant side, which is the glucose is a simple sugar, the energy source for the yeast. And this glucose is being converted or breaking down to ethanol plus carbon dioxide using an enzyme called yeast. And the yeast facilitates the breakdown of glucose. Now, from the product, which is the ethanol, as I've said, this is the alcohol, which is also known as ethyl alcohol. It is the primary product of interest in processes like brewing and fuel production. And the carbon dioxide, it is the gas that causes bubbling in fermented beverages and make bread rise, as you can see in the equation. In this anaerobic process, meaning it occurs in the absence of oxygen, yeast break down one molecule of glucose into two molecules of ethanol and two molecules of carbon dioxide. The energy released during this breakdown is used by yeast for its metabolic activities. In a simpler term, yeast eats sugar and in the process produces alcohol and carbon dioxide gas. This is why alcoholic drinks like beer and wine are made, and why yeast is used in baking to make bread light and airy. The second type of anaerobic respiration is the lactic acid fermentation. Lactic acid fermentation is a metabolic process that converts sugar into energy, specifically adenosine triphosphate, that is ATP, while producing lactic acid as a byproduct. It is an anaerobic process, meaning it occurs without oxygen and is often carried out by bacteria. As you can see from the image or picture, is lactic acid fermentation. The image illustrates the process of lactic acid fermentation. And what is the overall goal of this structure? The overall goal is to regenerate NAD so that glycolysis can continue producing ATP in the absence of oxygen. Now, let's look at the first step, which is glycolysis. Don't forget that glycolysis is the starting molecule in lactic acid fermentation. And the glucose, which is having a 6 carbon sugar, is broken down into molecule of pyruvate, that is 3 carbon compounds. Now let's look at the energy production. How does it produce energy? During glycolysis, a small amount of ATP, that is 2 nets of adenosine triphosphate, is produced from 2 ADP plus 2 pi. Now let's look at the electron carrier reduction. Also, 2 NAD plus molecule are reduced to 2 NADH molecule along with 2H. This NADH need to be reoxidized back to NAD for glycolysis to keep running. And when we look at the second part, the NAD plus regeneration, which is the lactic acid fermentation. And the starting molecule here is the 2 pyruvate molecule produced from glycolysis. And the process is each pyruvate molecule accepts electrons from NADH. This step oxidizes NADH back to NAD+. And the product is going to we are going to get is 2 molecules of lactic acid or lactate which are formed. The importance is the regeneration of this NAD plus is crucial. Without it, glycolysis will stop and no ATP will be produced. Why this happens? Lactic acid fermentation occurs in certain bacteria and in animal muscle cell during intense exercise when oxygen supply is limited. It is a way of quickly produce a small amount of ATP without oxygen, but it also leads to the build-up of lactic acid, which can cause muscle fatigue. In a simpler term, it means that when there is no oxygen available, our cell can't fully break down glucose. So they do a partial breakdown to get a little energy. To keep this partial breakdown going, they have to recycle a molecule called NAD+. They do this by converting pyruvate into lactic acid, which frees up the NAD+ for more energy production. I will be leaving you with some assignments which you shall put down upon so that you can prepare for the next class. The first question is define cellular respiration. 2. Describe 2 types of respiration with a chemical equation. 3. Explain the 2 types of respiration. Hope you have learned exhaustively what we have discussed from this topic. Until we meet again, keep studying and keep learning. Thank you for your attention.